has prepared everything. Yes, it's okay. It's launched. It's on air. We are on air. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being with us tonight. For the speakers to be with us tonight, I will introduce everyone. Unfortunately, last week I had to cancel last minute this webinar, and I was deeply sorry. But fortunately, the negotiators decided to continue the negotiations. So therefore, this webinar, tonight's webinar, is still an ongoing, is still trendy, and we're still discussing issues. We will discuss the Brexit tonight. It's been an important topic since 2016. After the negotiations, the UK leaving the EU on the 31st of January this year. But indeed, few things have really changed. The British people do not sit in the European institutions anymore, but nevertheless, the great majority of laws are still going on as if nothing has changed. So this is, of course, the case of the fisheries topic that we will discuss tonight. The CFP rules of the common fisheries policies are still being applied until the end of the transition period. So we have ongoing negotiations, they have started, but fisheries is among the last topics that are problematic. So tonight we will try to understand why, to explore different ways of getting out, what would be a good agreement, what would the consequences of such an agreement be, what can we do? The UK has very full of fish seas, and we have fishermen fishing in these seas. Therefore, finding an agreement is very important for the fishermen, for the coastal areas, and for the marine environment. This is what we will discuss about tonight with our four speakers. First of all, we will have Justine Guinea. She's working for the European BirdLife Committee. It is an international NGO specialized in protecting the biodiversity among the French Bird Protection Association. We also have Stéphane Pinto tonight. He's a fisher master working in Boulogne-sur-Mer, one of the first harbor fishery center in Europe. Is a vice president of the regional committee of fisheries. I've been in your region not long ago, but I didn't get the chance to meet you. And we also have Sarah Denman working, she's a legal expert working for the NGO, British NGO Client Earth, sorry. So she's specialized in environmental themes, working on the Brexit impacts on the environment, and also on the legal framework that will be decided for the British fisheries. And also, last but not least, we have Philippe Lamberts, co-president of the Greens EFA, is an MEP, member of the task force, the Brexit task force, following the negotiations. So we will discuss about the dates, places of these negotiations and why fisheries. And Philippe, you are with us tonight. Thank you very much, because I needed to cancel last week's meeting. And tonight you are with us to give us some introductory words on the participation of our groups. And the European Union said it and repeated it. They want to discuss a new framework on fisheries. And it is very important for us to have your view, because you're a member of the Greens. So do you think we will get a global agreement? Maybe you can let us know more. I will give you the floor right now so you can tell us more about. Apparently, we can't hear you.
Merci Caroline.
Voilà.
Bonsoir à toutes et à tous. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être parmi vous. Tu m'aurais posé la question il y a 4 semaines, je t'aurais dit il n'y aura pas d'accord. Parce que l'impression qui ressortait des différents mouvements du gouvernement britannique indiquait que ce gouvernement, en réalité, ne voulait pas d'accord. Et j'en veux pour preuve, d'une part, la présentation de la loi sur le marché intérieur britannique qui explicitement annonçait que le Royaume-Uni se réservait le droit, en fait, de ne pas respecter l'accord de séparation adopté il n'y a pas même un an et négocié par le gouvernement en place, donc même pas par un gouvernement précédent. Provocation majeure qui ne pouvait être comprise que d'une seule manière du côté européen. Le gouvernement britannique n'est pas digne de confiance. Par ailleurs, autour du sommet européen de la mi-octobre, Boris Johnson, comme il avait annoncé, a annoncé que de son point de vue, il n'y avait pas de progrès, donc il ne voyait pas la nécessité de poursuivre les négociations. Il faut dire qu'il a été un peu aidé dans cette déclaration un peu matamoresque par le Conseil européen, qui lui-même n'a pas échappé à l'excès en faisant des déclarations, et Macron en est coutumier, selon lesquelles toutes les concessions devraient venir du côté britannique. J'ai envie de dire que lorsque vous négociez de bonne foi, et je dirais en particulier si c'est vrai que vous tenez la brise haute à votre partenaire de négociation, vous ne le dites pas. Vous abstenez de le dire pour éviter de le provoquer et pour lui permettre le jour où il y a un accord de sortir de cet accord d'un tête haute, même si 90% des concessions auront dû être faites par ce partenaire. Toujours est-il que Boris Johnson a donc suspendu les négociations, annoncé que ça ne servait à rien que Michel Barnier ne revienne à Londres. 5 jours se sont écoulés jusqu'au moment où Michel est venu parler en plénière et a fait un discours sur l'état de la négociation. Dans ce discours, il a placé une phrase qui disait qu'il est évident que les deux parties vont faire des concessions, des déclarations dont le négociateur britannique David Frost s'est emparé pour dire que là, c'était un fait majeur et que ça autorisait le gouvernement britannique à relancer les négociations. On voit bien que à ce moment-là, le gouvernement britannique s'est accroché à peu près n'importe quoi pour expliquer qu'il s'est mal charrié. Et à ce moment-là, j'ai commencé à croire que le gouvernement britannique voulait un accord, et je le crois d'autant plus depuis ce qui s'est passé fin de semaine dernière, puisque vous savez que Boris Johnson a la réputation de régner en laissant gouverner son bras droit Dominic Cummings, qui est un nationaliste anglais, brexiteur évidemment forcené, qui, je pense, fait partie de ceux qui ne veulent pas d'accord avec l'Union européenne. Or, vendredi dernier, Dominic Cummings a été viré sans ménagement par le Premier ministre, levant par là même un obstacle majeur au sein de son équipe rapprochée. Ceci dit, il ne faut pas en tirer des conclusions hâtives. Si un obstacle est levé, ça ne veut pas dire pour autant qu'un accord sera trouvé, parce que David Frost, le négociateur, fait partie aussi des nationalistes anglais, hard Brexiters, et donc a priori pas tenté par un accord, mais il faudrait croire que, vu le contexte en particulier du Covid, au Royaume-Uni, vu la nécessité aussi pour Boris Johnson de conserver les circonscriptions précédemment travaillistes dans le cœur industriel du Royaume-Uni, il n'est peut-être pas de très bon aloi de refuser un accord avec l'Union européenne, autrement dit un accord, une absence d'accord qui aurait des conséquences économiques qui s'ajouteraient aux conséquences dramatiques du Covid. Donc, on pourrait penser que le gouvernement britannique s'apprête à conclure un accord avec l'Union européenne, mais comme tu le disais, Caroline, tous les points extrêmement durs de la négociation restent encore à trancher. Ce n'est pas étonnant, évidemment, que ces points sont conservés pour la fin. Il y a là-dedans, je dirais, un paquet qui est le paquet qu'on appelle level playing field, c'est-à-dire le paquet qui veut éviter que l'Union européenne et le marché intérieur ne s'ouvrent à une concurrence déloyale venue du Royaume-Uni. Donc, ce sont toutes les clauses qu'on appelle de non-régression sur le plan social, environnemental et autres. Ce sont associé à ça les règles sur les aides d'État et enfin, comme mécanisme de protection.
I will interrupt you 1 minute. Sorry, we have a problem with the translation.
Ah.
There is an echo or something, apparently. An echo.
So
I don't know what to do to solve this problem.
It seems that the original sound for those who are hearing the interpretation is the original sound is louder than the interpretation itself. So I don't know if the interpreter can solve that.
I cannot. I cannot solve this issue. I'm sorry. I'm not a technician. From my side, I can only interpret. I'm sorry. Maybe Lois, Antoine.
What is weird is that when Justine is speaking, I cannot hear you through the English language. So I think maybe this is a switch that has not been done properly by the interpreters.
So I think Justine just said that every participants, when they're not speaking, need to mute their microphones. So this has been done. And also they need to mute the original speech that it's been discussed in French, and they need to click on the English interpretation. So to only hear the interpreter.
Okay, let's continue and see how it goes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Several people were speaking at the same time. Okay, so I just was saying that what we still need to address is about the integrity of the internal market, several rules to follow, the state rules, in order to provide one or two partners during the negotiation to compete directly with their partners. So unilateral measures, because the UK is refusing to align on the European legislation, we need to follow strictly the European rules with consultation. But as we are in a not so strict regime, we need to preserve the ability for the European Union to make suspension measures, suspending the access to the market in the case or the UK would be judged as or seen as practicing illegal competency. So until now, the UK government refused to do that. They are refusing unilateral sanctions. And we don't like it, us, the Greens, because the UK government is refusing repression. They're refusing to comply with the rules and regulations. So we have a real issue here. And this is the real issue, because what we're discussing tonight is about a topic or something which has a very high symbolic importance. And in regards to the economy, the consequence is quite limited, you know. I'm not saying that the fishermen's work from this region or that country is insignificant. This is not what I'm saying, but the exchanges between the UK and the European Union is extremely important, and we need to find a solution. This is one of the main domains among which the UK was quite was a winner, and the exit of the EU, the Brexit should not produce a status quo. We will not get an unlimited access to UK seas, to UK fishes, as it was done today. Let's not dream about that. It won't be possible. So we want to show you that the UK is taking back control on its territorial and internal seas, but nevertheless, there won't be probably not a real a concrete break, because this won't be really clever, because they still need to sell part of their British fish, you know. So clearly the Brexit is a really bad deal in every case. So the strategy that was chosen by Michel Barnier to discuss and tackle this issue, the fisheries issues, is about taking it back to its just measure. So are the European people able to battle? Because will there answer favorably, positively to all that the British people are asking? This is unlikely. From what Michel Barnier says, we are trying to find a way of exchanging on some aspects. British people are really interested about specific measures when it comes to fisheries. So the UK would like to have a more honest, let's say, exchange with the EU, saying, okay, you want to access to, if the UK, you want to access the European energy market, okay, but we as European, we want to keep accessing to the British seas, okay, maybe we can do that because we're talking about 600 million euros per year for the global market, you know, so everything is today still not solved. I don't have Michel Barnier's feedback since last Friday. I don't have a feedback, so I don't know what is going on, but what is sure is it's far from being settled. Why? Because as you know, the European Parliament has to be a ruler examining the treaty when a treaty an agreement will be signed between the two partners before we will sign it. We've already said clearly that for us, the end of October will be the deadline, and at the best of cases, we will have a treaty project 3 weeks after that. 3 weeks late. So I believe we need to conclude on that issue. British people also are aware of the fact that it is now or never. So I'm expecting that this topic will be settled at the very last minute. It is very possible. It will be done with Ursula von der Leyen and Boris Johnson, probably, then with Michel Barnier. And, you know, we need a whole choreography to happen because it's a very complicated process. And the UK really battle like a real lion, you know, they need to show that, you know, to set the deal. And, you know, it is like a Trump speech, way of speaking, you know. So I believe that this agreement would have forced Boris Johnson to go beyond his own red line. And I'm sure that when he will present the agreement, he will say that the UK has won on all aspects. I believe this is what will happen. But at the end, we will have a separation agreement being concluded between the UK and the EU. Boris Johnson said that it was a Theresa May agreement. He really spoke about it negatively on the Irish aspect. So apparently he's hoping for a better deal, but in real he obtained already a better deal for the EU, because the solution that has been decided by the Johnson government on the North Ireland question is a method that is allowing a higher legislative safety, but it did not prevent Boris Johnson to sell it as a great improvement for the UK government, you know. So this is the best possible scenario that we can imagine, that Mr. Johnson, you know, will present it like that. And it will be also hopefully acceptable for the UK. But on the fisheries, the EU will have to make concessions, you know. We won't be able to keep the exact same conditions we have today. And I perfectly know that during negotiations, whatever the ultimate solution chosen, the European team will have to negotiate a transition period. So we won't move from a favorable, positive solution to a negative one from one year to another one. So this has to be part of the negotiation. What is the ideal transition deadline, you know, to move from one stage to the final stage of this UK EU relationship? This is all I had to say for the moment. I still believe that we will reach an agreement, but by looking by remembering the questions that have been asked from the UK to the EU, it's not really coherent. So I believe there is a pressure from the finance minister, the UK finance minister, who is not very popular. His position is strictly in favor of an agreement. He doesn't want to suffer from the negative impact of the Brexit. So I believe that realistic people, there's still some in the British government, but they're not winning. But let's not exclude, how can I put it, a rapid launch, because of a unfortunate series of sentences from one or another one. But this is where we stand. Okay, apparently you answered a few questions I had to ask you in regards to the date to find an agreement. It is clear that we need to have the text. It should be done rapidly. So is it only about the fishery that we are struggling, or are we also struggling on other aspects during negotiations? Yes, it's mainly on fisheries. So I believe this is the crucial topic. And it is extremely complicated to find a solution for it. And the Financial Times editor said it this morning. The scope of the access of the European market is linked to the regulatory compliance, and this negotiation has been on the table since the very beginning. This is the main element. So I'm expecting to, yes, what we need is that politics happen, and also we need legal experts to intervene, but we need, at one point, we need to cut it. But what is sure is there absolutely no appetite from the elected members and the European Parliament to accept a danger in terms of ending the good conditions we had. So if we need to go through an ordeal, I believe that the European Parliament's position is very clear. Then you mentioned a transition period. What is its duration? What can its duration be? I have absolutely no clue. It depends on the negotiations, but I imagine that the more the deal will be favorable and the longer the period will be. This is what I believe. Personally, I was extremely patient and careful when it was about hearing what was being said. But today here we have someone with a real European MEP, but is also a French person. Let's say that Michel Barnier is very sensitive to the fisheries topic, and in fact there are several cities, coastal cities, that would be directly impacted by the Brexit. So I believe he is absolutely, it is clear for him that it is crucial. So for you, during these last moments, we will not put the fisheries aside. No, it won't be sacrificed, but we won't probably reach a status quo. Let's be clear on that. Maybe this is the point on which the European government, the British government will be able to say the European Parliament or the European groups moved backwards. Okay, I have a question. If we don't have an agreement in the end, how will the European Parliament react? Well, in fact, the EU will have to be ready to get ready with an ordeal, to deal with that situation. And we will be around the table, and we will only be around the same table when we will have dealt with that situation. It's true that the UK will be trying to devise, different groups will try to find unilateral or bilateral agreements, probably. So we need to be careful because our power as the EU is superior, so probably the UK will try to get back at us, but it will probably take time. It will take several times, probably it will be a bit better, because if this decision is made from one day to another day, this is the worst situation, worst case scenario. But what is obvious is from the European negotiator side, we're not ready to sacrifice the integrity of the internal market to avoid the disaster of not finding an agreement for fishermen. In the chat, there is a question. The British concluded an agreement with the Japanese. Is there a deal with the Japanese people? Is there an agreement? I don't know. You would have to ask the question to the Commission. I don't know when it comes to fisheries. So Philippe, I wanted to thank you, first of all, for joining us tonight. I know you're extremely busy and you're always welcome. And you're very welcome to stay with us if you have time. No, I think I will need to leave. Are there other questions? Philippe, a question for Philippe before he's leaving? Maybe? No? No question? So thank you very much, Philippe. Goodbye, Philippe. Thank you. So now we will give an overview of the
now
fisheries.
We're going to talk about
tackle more
fishing,
this issue of fisheries. So Justine, the EU
where we're at,
and the UK
fishing.
have
So
many things in common.
France and the
fishes
UK have many
don't know
things in
borders.
common in terms of the
fishes
seas
without borders. So
and the
can you
fish
tell us what is at
stocks.
stake?
So
how many
Justine and
species
Sarah,
we're talking
can
about?
you please explain to us
how many
how
fishermen,
many fishermen
will be
impacted? What is the size of the surface that will be impacted, etc.? Well, first of all, thanks a lot for your invitation, and thank you for organizing this exchange, which is extremely important and which was kind of put at the margin during the Brexit negotiations. So it's important to talk about this issue, about we mostly focused on the economic aspects as well as the what would be the impact on the UK waters of the New Deal. But it's important also to draw attention on what will be the impact for the environment and natural resources, because nature should be really at the core of the negotiations, because the UK and the EU share the same ecosystem and the same stocks of fish. Therefore, the whole scientific community says that overfishing is the main cause of marine biodiversity loss in the past few years. So it's important to consider that the collapse of resources also has an impact on our own ability to feed ourselves on the long term, but also it will also have an impact on natural resources and fish stocks on the longer term. If, for example, there is a reduction in foraging fish stocks, there will be many implications. So what is really important for us is to put back the Brexit and its negotiations on fishing in its context, which is the context of the climate crisis and the loss of biodiversity, and to remind you that all the negotiations, all the deals, the fishing deals concluded by the EU should be guided by the spirit of the Paris Agreement and the international agreements, for example, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and other international agreements. It is important to remember also that these negotiations take place within a European context, but also within already existing legislation. We have the common fisheries policy, which has put in place legally binding obligations. So this governance model is important because we know that more than 40% of fish stocks in the North and Atlantic Sea are impacted by overfishing. and there are other directives like the Habitats and Birds directives. And we know that we need to continue these efforts following Brexit. There is also the political EU agenda, which we need to take into consideration. There is this European Green Deal, which gave birth to the Biodiversity Strategy, the Farm to Fork Strategy, which are major strategies whose aim is to really contribute and protect biodiversity, and especially marine biodiversity. So this biodiversity strategy also heralds a change in the commercial laws and legislations. So these are movements, these are ongoing trends in the EU, which need to be taken into account between the EU and other countries within those fishing negotiations. So it is important to have an agreement that benefits both to the EU and to the UK, as Philip Lamberts explained, and it takes into account the complexity of the situation. Of course, this fishing agreement became kind of an emblem, kind of a token of that Brexit, those Brexit negotiations, and a very strong symbol. And we hope that in this potential last decisive week, we hope that this lever will not be used in a harmful way, and that we won't see a commercial agreement that is really detrimental to the environment, because there is a need to achieve this agreement at all costs. And we hope that it will not be detrimental to the marine environment and the fish stocks that both the EU and the UK have in common and have to share. So from an environmental point of view, we want to avoid having a kind of a race towards the exhaustion and the collapse of resources. So the objective of sustainability needs to be an absolute priority in these negotiations, if we still have the time to influence them in some way. And I think what's really important is to observe and to note that the environmental aspects also have a strong economic aspect, because if you don't respect the environment, this could also impact and cause unfair competition. So I'm ready to discuss this with you. All right, now I have a question for Stéphane. So Stéphane, you are fishing in Boulogne-sur-Mer. So with what frequency do you actually fish in the British waters, and what happens in your region? What is the reality for your small-scale fishermen? You just have to switch on your mic, please. So good evening to all of you. Yes, my name is Stéphane Pinto. I'm a master a fisherman in Boulogne-sur-Mer. I'm responsible for Federation for the north of France. And this is something we're very worried about. And we're very worried about it with respect to the future of Europe. If we don't manage to get a deal, and this is such a huge maritime area and domain, we might end up in a geographical area that is so diminished and restricted. And here we fish with nets or trawlers, or different types of vessels, but there would be a problem with the overexploitation of resources, because currently we were now working on an extended area, but you need to know that for us, the activity of fishing in the British areas in the north of France, this is 75% of our fishing time. So it's the equivalent of 75% of our turnover. And some of our fishermen also work completely, work 100% of their time in the British area. So this is going to have an impact on fishing resources, and much more so than the climate change could have done in the next 50 years. So there's a very crucial impact on the fishing stocks and resources. Did you want to add anything? Well, yes, there is also something else at stake. We also need to negotiate the fact that we have to share the fisheries. There are different types of fishing methods, scallop fishing, trawler fishing, etc. So the fishermen in the EU, including the British fishermen, that will be impacted by this. There will be it will have an impact on the different fleets and kind of a sea battle, and we will first of all try to defend ourselves from other flotillas like the British flotillas. So now I have a question for Sarah. Sarah, you work in the UK on fishing aspects. What do you think about these questions? Because of course, as Philip said, it is not such a crucial sector for the UK. Can you tell us more about the UK fishing sector?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Caroline. So I think it's worth noting at the start that fisheries is a very small part of the UK economy. It makes up a really small part of GDP, but for coastal communities, it's actually very important. And you will have seen actually in the UK during the Brexit debate, fisheries became this huge kind of totemic issue and kind of really embodied the idea of taking back control. So fisheries, whilst a small part of the UK economy, suddenly became enormously important in the debate. And we're seeing this now in the negotiations as well. As I understand it, most of the topics have been agreed on, but fisheries is one of the key things that's outstanding. Now, what's concerning, I think, from a UK perspective, is that the rhetoric we've seen so far from the UK government falls far short on sustainability. And we're seeing this very clearly in the UK's Fisheries Bill. So just to give a bit of context, so the Fisheries Bill will be the domestic legislation for fisheries and actually replaces many provisions of the Common Fisheries Policy. Now, the Fisheries Bill actually completed its parliamentary passage just last week, so we expect it to receive royal assent and become law just before the end of the transition period. Now, there are several welcome provisions on sustainability in the Fisheries Bill, but it really falls short of the government's promise of sustainable fisheries enshrined in law. And obviously that's an issue for us in the UK, but that's also a really big issue for shared stocks. And that's something that we're really concerned about in the context of a potential deal or no deal with the EU. So what the Fisheries Bill does is it actually gives UK authorities really wide discretion to permit overfishing and to actually balance scientific advice against socioeconomic considerations, which is hugely concerning. Now, two of the biggest issues, I think, for the purposes of this discussion are firstly that there isn't a commitment to ensure that fishing limits are set at sustainable levels. And the second one being that there's no commitment to the sustainable management of shared stocks. Just touching on the first of those, so there's no commitment now to ensure that fishing limits are set at sustainable levels. Now, obviously, under the Common Fisheries Policy, you've got Article 2, which says that catch limits have to be set at sustainable levels by 2020. And what you've also got is UN Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is to end overfishing by 2020. And what's interesting is a clear commitment to set fishing limits at sustainable levels is vital to protect fish stocks and to deliver ocean recovery. And it was actually promised in the Conservative Manifesto and also in the Queen's speech at the end of last year. So this is something that was very much promised by the UK government. But what the Fisheries Bill actually does is it removes that legal commitment set out in Article 2 of the Common Fisheries Policy, which is to set catch limits at maximum sustainable yields by 2020. So it removes that, and what it replaces it with is a simple kind of aspirational objective to achieve healthy biomass for stocks. Now, the problem is that that objective isn't legally binding. It's not subject to any deadline, unlike that in the Common Fisheries Policy, and it's dealt with by way of a policy statement. And that policy statement can be disregarded in a wide range of circumstances. So this obviously represents a real regression in environmental standards from the Common Fisheries Policy, and I think sets a kind of worrying precedent for how the UK has approached the negotiations with the EU on fisheries. And just to flag as well that more than 40% of all UK fish stocks were overfished in 2019, and that's actually up from 31% in 2018. So as you can see, there's very worrying direction here in the UK of overfishing, and the Fisheries Bill, it doesn't contain the legal safeguards that we would like to see to actually reverse that trend. Touching on the second issue that I mentioned, there's no commitment to the sustainable management of shared stocks. Now, again, this is really quite different from the position that's in the Common Fisheries Policy. So in the Common Fisheries Policy, you've got Article 33, which says that the EU must negotiate with third countries with clear sustainability criteria in mind when looking at fisheries negotiations. But the Fisheries Bill is completely silent on this again. And obviously the UK shares over 100 stocks with the EU. So I think this is a really big concern from an environmental perspective. So what does this mean for negotiations then? Well, from the various debates that have been held in Parliament on the Fisheries Bill, I think what's very clear is that the UK wants maximum flexibility post-Brexit. As I mentioned, and as Philippe alluded to as well, I think the UK government really wants to be seen to be delivering Brexit for the fishing industry. And fisheries played a really important part in the debate and was really linked to the idea of taking back control. So what that means is that the UK doesn't want to have to cut catch limits or close a particular fishery if doing so would have a detrimental effect on the fishing industry, even if those fish stocks are really close to collapse. So I think with this in mind, and for the purposes of this evening, I think it really highlights the importance of the UK and the EU reaching an agreement on fisheries. And what's also really important is that that agreement prioritises the sustainable management of shared stocks post-Brexit. I think, you know, despite what's happening in the UK, at least that can really help ensure that our shared marine environment will be protected, even if the domestic situation in the UK is a little bit more concerning.
Justine, you talked about biodiversity earlier. This is a question I have for Justine and Sarah. We have an objective by the EU Commission of 30% of protected marine areas, and in the UK, what about the UK with regards to the marine protected areas? Because some of those areas are actually under the EU, are part of the EU. So I'm going to start, and maybe Sarah will continue with regards to protected areas, marine areas. So in the UK, yes, this is a question that is really important. This is something that we try to push for this fishing agreement. We want to have a collaboration which is maintained between the EU and the UK to continue to designate those marine protected areas, and EU vessels can still, if the EU vessels can still access UK waters, this will still need to be enforced. They won't be allowed to go into these marine protected marine areas. So this is absolutely essential. In the biodiversity strategy, as you said, there are new objectives. This objective of 30% of protected marine areas by 2030 within the European Union, and within the discussions we have within the Convention for Biological Diversity, we want to have this objective of 30% of protected marine areas globally by 2030. So it'll be important to follow these discussions. We know that the UK wants to position itself as a leader publicly and with regards to the environment. We know it wants to be more ambitious on a global level with their presidency of COP26 next year. The Conference of Parties 26 next year, and they've already signed the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, whereby they commit to this objective of 30% of marine protected areas by 2030. So we hope the collaboration will be maintained. There is this European objective of 30% of marine protected areas, and we hope this will take into account the UK marine areas. We hope there will be a collaboration on this. Sarah, would you like to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think marine protected areas are a very good example, actually, of why this cooperation and why an agreement is so important. Because obviously, fish, marine animals move and they don't respect borders. And I think when we look at marine protected areas, joint management is so important to make sure that, you know, countries are working together and protecting this shared resource. So it does highlight the importance of reaching an agreement and of collaboration. From a UK perspective, we are also aiming for 30% by 2030. The Fisheries Bill will give us powers to manage our own marine protected areas. So that could, in certain circumstances, mean keeping out vessels, either British vessels or foreign vessels as well. But, you know, I think what's important here is that countries work together on the management, and that, you know, marine protected areas don't become a kind of a way of perhaps retaliating against EU or other foreign vessels, you know, relating to access and things like that.
When we talk about the link between these negotiations and the new Fisheries Bill, so Sarah, you talked a little bit about it, and you talked about the UK Fisheries Bill. Within the common fisheries policy, we have sustainability objectives, sustainable management of fish stocks. And I think that in the future law in the UK, we won't have the same commitments. So what is at stake with this future law? And what was the reaction of the fishing sector and the fishing industry to this law?
Well, I think obviously, as I'm sure it is in the EU, the fishing industry is really varied in the UK. There are various different sections of the catching sector. I think the Fisheries Bill was broadly welcomed, and I would add that, you know, as Green Groups as well, we did welcome the Fisheries Bill. It does have some really good objectives in it. You know, it has new objectives on bycatch. It has an objective on climate change, which I think, you know, is really progressive, and it could do a huge amount to change what the marine environment looks like in the UK. So that's very welcome. And I think, you know, for the UK fishing industry as a whole, just to have something in place which talks about access mainly, I think obviously access to waters is a huge thing for British fishermen. And what the Fisheries Bill does is stop automatic access of non-UK vessels. And so I think the Fisheries Bill was broadly welcomed by the fishing industry. But what I would say is that the kind of smaller scale fishermen recognise that there are serious issues with the bill. You know, the issues that I've mentioned about the fact that there is no longer a legal commitment. You know, there are these objectives, which is great, and there are policy statements and things like that, but without a legal commitment to fish sustainably, you're kind of just relying on the government to do the right thing. And that's concerning given the trajectory we're seeing with overfishing. And so those small scale fishers that we speak to are worried, because obviously if fish stocks decline, then that has a really negative knock-on effect on coastal communities. And these fishermen are really kind of rely on healthy fish stocks in order to make a living, in order to support those coastal communities. So, you know, they recognise that it's very much in their interest to have a healthy marine environment with healthy fish stocks. So I think, you know, they are very concerned about the Fisheries Bill. Broadly, people are concerned. You know, the issues I've raised show that the Fisheries Bill is very far from what the government claimed it was, which was a world-leading piece of legislation for the marine environment, and it's obviously not that. And I think people very much recognise that here in the UK.
I'd like to talk about the question of the agreement itself. Justine, you're following these fishing negotiations between the EU and the UK. Can you tell us more about what is being negotiated, and what are the points on which the EU and the UK agree, and what are the points of disagreement between the two parties, and what would be a good agreement according to you? Right. Yes, the negotiations are very difficult right now. The EU and the UK have a hard time finding an agreement on most of the points. The EU would like the fishing agreement to be a part of the commercial agreements, which is also a strategy aimed at influencing the negotiations and linking this question to the access of the UK to the energy sector, the energy market, as was mentioned earlier. And conversely, the UK would like an agreement that is separate. They want to negotiate on fish catch limits every year, whereas the other party would like a multi-year agreement. So one other point that is important for the EU derives from this EU position of basing the negotiations on the common fisheries policy in general and its objectives in terms of sustainability, and the principle of MSY, maximum sustainable yield, which is extremely important. And we hope this principle will be kept and maintained, but the UK is against the fact of including this principle in the fishing agreement. So this is one major major controversial point within the agreement. And then there is this problem with regards to areas whereby British fishermen would have all the fishing rights for all the UK waters. I'm not a specialist in that fishing sector. I work more on biodiversity questions, but these are the main points, problematic points between the EU and the UK, and I really think that what is really missing from these agreements is the fact of ensuring sustainability and the protection of marine resources. This should have priority over political and economic and short-term interests. And the current commitments of the EU in terms of protecting the marine species and the marine environment should not be lowered and diminished. This will have an impact on the sustainability of the common fisheries policy as a whole. And another point which is really important for us is to have a strong scientific basis for our fishing agreements. So the UK and the EU should follow the best scientific advice and that is available when they define tax total admissible catches. And what is also very important is that we consider the precautionary approach, which would always guide us in determining this agreement. This is something that the UK finds it hard to accept. This is always a roadblock in the negotiations, but it is also very important in order to ensure that we don't have an activity, an economic activity that is detrimental to the environment and that is harmful to the environment. So we would like this fishing agreement to take into account all of this. As Sarah mentioned, the fishing sector depends on a healthy marine environment and depends on natural resources that need to be renewed naturally. This is a question that is still difficult between the UK and the EU. And one point which is extremely important as well is to maintain the efforts to combat overfishing and harmful ways of fishing, and to combat ways of methods of fishing that will have a negative impact on seabirds, on wading birds, on other species. So currently there are methods which enable within the EU agreement which prevent this. So within the common fisheries policy, the EU vessels need to implement these measures and need to collect scientific data on the impact of their activities on the marine environment when they fish in the European waters. So this is something we need to maintain within our activities in the UK waters, if possible. So we really hope these aspects will be reflected in the agreements. And unfortunately, we see that the discussions have focused so far on the question of access to waters and sovereignty, the British sovereignty, because the UK wants to have exclusive control over the waters. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. So Stefan, would you like to react on this? And what would be a good agreement? And who would be the losers? What is the state of fish stocks where you fish?
I would like to discuss many things, but it's true that we have a lot of issues with many species. But I believe that sometimes, for some on some aspects, we've been taken by surprise, and we've been unable to protect our fishes. And I am a fisherman from the Hauts-de-France region, so I will not go back to the debate, but the European Union needs to facilitate the development of fisheries and new techniques that they say are innovative, but in fact, I believe there are so many more ways and methods. So it's not the debate, but okay, among these methods, yes, it's true that we have agreements with the UK, which have to first, on the first aspect, and this is where I fully agree with Sarah, during the negotiation, we need to look at the overfishing aspect, because it has a negative aspect for the British and for the European people. Let's be aware of that fact. A fish doesn't know borders. It swims wherever it wants, so it can swim in French waters, in English waters, in terms of natural resources, we will all have to pay the price in time. whether we are British fishermen or EU fishermen, we will all be losers. We therefore need to find an agreement between the UK government, British government, and the EU. For my side, when it comes to the bad common policies on fisheries, maybe we need to ask ourselves the real questions. So the UK has decided to leave, to exit the EU, but for us fishermen, among the discussions, we cannot find an agreement. These are real questions. Therefore, we need to relaunch a new common policies on fisheries that would be new, that will tackle the issues of environment, fisheries, and the quantity. I believe the speech has ended. Mr. Pinto. Yes, you had an issue, technical issue. So I will go back to what I was saying. I believe that today the real question is, yes, we have resources, fish resources, and it is at stake. I'm looking at the sole in the North Sea, etc. Sometimes it's linked to ways of fishing that have been deployed largely has been funded by the EU. You know, this is about all these little mistakes, you know, that led to the British fishermen to say, okay, this is a faulty way of proceeding, etc. Yes, okay, we're trying to look at sustainability. We're looking at the maximum catchment. But we're looking at our side as well. We've observed that at the end of the day, the EU will be in favor of overfishing, for instance. We are struggling. I believe that Mrs. The Eurodeputee, you've faced that situation. You've seen the results of the last 10 years. We've seen that there's been a decrease, a large decrease in terms of the fishes. I'm thinking about the sole that are catched. And all these fishes are the victims of overfishing linked to these bad fishing methods. So the fishing is really a crucial topic. And I believe that we need to find a way to solve this. We are talking on and on about environmental issues. We have environmental debates when it comes to species, extinct species. And us fishermen, we're observing something else. I have English colleagues. I've been discussing with them as well. And we were angry because we had to let some fish aside, you know, and this is a real waste. So I do not believe when we're talking about all these issues, the British fishermen are struggling as we do. So we have to let enormous quantities of fishes go. So we're talking about discarding fishes, you know, and it's true for the British fishermen, the European fishermen. It's the same. We are all in the same boat, if you want. So it is a shame that we are victimizing the fishermen, who are absolutely not responsible of that situation. I am a fisherman, and we say, okay, we don't have fishes enough, but we do have stocks, we do have tons. But at one point we realized, and even the science has observed that the climate change has impoverished our waters because of the rising temperatures of the seas. So it is extremely complicated. It is impacting the whole ecosystem. And it's true that today we've been able to see, and we are observing it, a decrease in terms of populations of fishes, of what we can catch. And there is a general policy which, let's say, made the UK leave the EU in a way, you know? Yes, I will answer to your speech, Stéphane, and what you said on the soul. And we discussed it yesterday. Yesterday we discussed it during our debate with the Commission. We discussed electrofishing, and now I have a little question for Sarah. Sarah, on what way could we put pressure on the UK when it comes to fisheries? How could we put pressure on them?
Well, I think I obviously haven't been party to how the negotiations have been going, but I think the UK is already under a lot of pressure from obviously the UK fishing industry on the one side, which is potentially informing their positions around sustainability and around some of the issues that we've been talking about. So you may see in the press that the UK is very happy to walk away from negotiations and that they don't see some of these things as issues. But something I wanted to raise actually is that British people tend not to actually eat British fish, and actually around 2/3 of the exported catch in the UK actually ends up in the EU. And of that, British shellfish sales make up a huge amount. And these shellfish exports are actually vital to the small scale fishermen in Scotland and the West Country in the UK. And these shellfish in particular need to be exported live, which is a lot more difficult if there's no frictionless trade at the border.
There's a problem with the interpretation. Can the French interpreter speak?
So apparently I'm interpreting into French and they can hear me.
C'est réglé. Merci.
I'll keep going, and then if there's a problem, please do let me know, obviously. Yeah, so I was just saying that I think it may seem that the UK doesn't feel any pressure on the sustainability side of things, or that it doesn't necessarily feel any pressure to reach an agreement. But actually, there's a lot more at stake here. And in terms of, the UK wants to stop access to its waters, and that's played a really big part in the media in this debate. But exports from the UK to the EU are actually extremely important as well. And what I was just saying is that live shellfish in particular, those exports rely on frictionless trade at the EU border. And if we don't reach a deal, and if the UK does decide to walk away, then those fishermen and those coastal communities could be devastated overnight. The other thing, obviously, to note here is that, if the UK decides to walk away, and if it decides to restrict access to fishing in the UK fishing zone, then that would almost certainly lead to reciprocal restrictions being placed on UK vessels fishing in the EU. So I think, it's very much in the interest of both the UK and the EU to reach an agreement on stocks and to, prioritise sustainability. And I think the UK is really aware of that. Perhaps not in the media, that's not the kind of story that's been told, but the UK is very aware of that. And I think, privately, they will be looking for a deal on fisheries. It's difficult publicly because fisheries and Brexit are so intertwined and they have become a very political thing. So I think the UK is feeling that pressure anyway. We've tried very hard on the UK side to work closely with UK government to try and advise them on this and to really emphasise the urgency of the situation at the moment. As Justine mentioned earlier, we are in an ecological and climate emergency, and overfishing is the biggest cause of marine biodiversity loss. And that's something we've really kind of tried to get across to the UK government, because, with the Fisheries Bill setting a kind of worrying precedent anyway, if the UK can't reach a deal with the EU on fisheries, and one that prioritises sustainability, then there could be serious risks for the marine environment. And I think continuing to make that clear to the UK will be really important.
So the question is, what do we do in case of no deal if there's no agreement? So Stefan, what are the direct consequences of such a no deal? You mentioned the conventions, the agreements between fishermen. So what would be for you the direct consequences if there's no agreement? You talked about tensions. Can you tell us more, maybe? Yes, I believe that the tension would be a minor issue in comparison to the reality. In reality, what is crucial is the economy for European fishermen. It is a disaster. It would be a real disaster for fisheries, for all an industry. Today, I cannot imagine this case happening, but it is clear that in the fishermen's mind, the more we move toward the crucial moment, and the more we realize that indeed, if we were not able to find an agreement between the EU and the UK, leading to it would exclude the European fishermen from British waters, it would be a catastrophe. And if at the European Union level, okay, we are prepared to face a no deal, letting believe that we would support, financially support fisheries. Okay, but to what extent? To what extent could we support fisheries that are really relying on British waters? So I can imagine two cases. At one point, we can support fisheries while still keeping a geographical area overexploited by activities that should not rely on European funding to continue. And in the end, maybe if we would have the hope of finding an agreement in many months, and then all fisheries could once again work normally as they were doing before, knowing that the UK would protect their international seas, maybe we would arrive at a case when we would have overexploited our resources after for many months, and then in the end we would have no more resources, allowing us to resume our activity normally. So this is a real danger here. The difficulties we can face if there was no deal, we would keep the boats ashore for many, many months. It's not a real solution for the fishermen, because we are fishermen. Our job is to take our boats at high sea, and not relying or depending on public funding. This is not what we are about, because we are talking about many companies, activities that are depending on their work. This is extremely tricky, complicated, but it's clear that if there was no agreement, I believe that the levels of our fleets in Europe, among the fleets, there will be a real disaster, a huge disaster. Entire fleets will be suffering. We are already suffering, with this pandemic, this COVID, in terms of trade. With what we catch, we are suffering already. It is a disaster, with all these restaurants closed, etc. Allowing the fishermen to live, to make a living from their activities. So then, if we were to face a no deal, keeping the boats at the harbor, then it would be like partial unemployment, etc. This would be terrible. There is, let's not forget, there is an economic situation underlying, and maybe some companies, fishermen with no more work, no more job. So this is what could happen, bankruptcies, etc. So this is to answer your question. When it comes to fishes catched by UK fishermen, is it exported? Yes, it's a case today. We have these fishes being exported. We didn't really face any issues here, but it's true that if tomorrow there were no deal, no agreement between the EU and the UK, then it would be much more complicated, extremely complicated for the British fishermen as well as for the rest of Europe fishermen, you know. We cannot even think about it. But to answer your question, Caroline, yes, it's clear that a whole sector of the economy would be destroyed in this industry. And it would cause unemployment.
Philippe Lamberts was saying that the EU would have to make concessions. What do we do if we have an agreement that plans that within 1 or 2 years there will be fishing regulations in the European market? What when we do, and with regards to these uncertainties we have with regards to the fishing sector, last Saturday, some fishermen in Boulogne took some commitments in order to maintain the professions. What is it exactly? What are the solidarity measures that are being created within the profession? So with regards to the concessions and what Philippe Lambert said earlier, if we have an agreement that that actually entails some restrictions within 1 or 2 years, what do we do in terms of small-scale fishing? Well, we're restricted in terms of our movements. We have restriction in terms of time, less than 24 hours. Some fishermen go for less than 72 hours. And then some people work on industrial fishing boats 100% of their time. So it's different. They don't have the same restrictions. Maybe we will have the same type of negotiations as with the Norwegian agreements, with the fact that we don't have the possibility to implement agreements between the two countries. I know that there are agreements between Norway and the EU with regards to quotas. I don't know all the details about these agreements, but I know that it exists. And with regards to your second question, which I've already forgotten, well, last Saturday, fishermen and the people working in fish markets and in the fishing sector in Boulogne-sur-Mer took some commitments. What does it mean? Well, these commitments were related to COVID. There was a meeting and this Dutch fleet in the Boulogne harbor, which is more and more present. So what happened is that the fishing sector and the processing sector gathered in Boulogne-sur-Mer in the fish market to try to find a solution with regards to fish surplus, which kind of became more and more an issue with COVID. We kind of divided the fleets. We halved the flotillas, the fishing fleets. Today, for Boulogne, we need 10 tons of fish. So for this 10 tons of fish, this will be fished by 40 or 50% of the Boulogne fleet. So we kind of organized a rota to respond to the needs of the processing sector in Boulogne-sur-Mer. And the Dutch fishermen and we also had to take into account the Dutch fleets and the export sector. And this agreement that we found was kind of good. It enabled the local fisheries and also the transformation, the processing sector to continue to work, even if we are now in this COVID context, which is very difficult. And with regards to what you were saying, Justine, earlier, Stefan was talking about the Norwegian model. Can you tell us a little bit more about this Norwegian model and the fishing possibilities and capacities? I am not an expert in the Norwegian model, but I know that there are less guarantees in terms of sustainability. And I know that within the agreement with Norway, the quotas are set unilaterally, which generally causes overfishing, which we really want to avoid within the framework of a fishing agreement with the UK. Just to come back to the question on the scenario of the no deal, this is something we're very worried about, because if there is no deal, there would be no collaboration on the management of shared stocks between the UK and the EU. And as we've mentioned it already, these species know no borders whatsoever. So it is extremely important that both parties continue to collaborate. We're really afraid there might be a race that would lead to the collapse of fishing stocks. We are a little bit afraid that the fact that EU vessels could not enter the UK waters would mean there would be an increase in the quotas in the UK, but it would also lead to a fishing activity that is not regulated, not coordinated on a European level. So we really want to know what would be the result from an environmental point of view. And I think I agree with what Stefan said about the risk of social conflicts. So it is important that this collaboration continues. And this is all also related to the other environmental questions that I've mentioned earlier with regards to marine protected areas. This is something we're very worried about on our side. I still have two questions in the chat. First of all, did we measure the impact of the Brexit with regards to the governance of a certain number of international conventions, for instance, with regards to OSPA? Can Justine or Sarah respond to this?
Yeah.
I think I will let Sarah answer this one.
Yeah, sure. So the UK will still be a part of those international conventions, which is great because, you know, in the event of no deal, for example, it will be UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which will still, to some extent, regulate fisheries in the UK. So hopefully we won't end up with this kind of wild west of the UK going off and setting fishing limits at unsustainable levels, because it will still be subject to those international conventions. The UK will also still be part of the international bodies. So, for example, the RFMOs, it's already applied to be a part of them as an independent coastal state, obviously now. So that's really helpful, obviously. UK, even if there isn't any deal, the UK will still be subject to international obligations on a number of these areas. The risk is that in the UK, we have what's called a dualist legal system. So while we are subject to these international laws, they're not legally binding in the same way that they would be if they were domestic laws in the UK. So what that means is that if the UK breaches a term of international law, we'd be able to put political pressure on them for having breached it, but it would be very difficult to hold them to account from a legal perspective or kind of take them to court on that. So that's where we stand with that. And I think, again, reiterates the importance of having an agreement with the EU as well, so that we don't have to rely solely on the UK's international law commitments on this.
So now I'll have to conclude because it is already 7:57 and we need to continue to finish at 8 o'clock. I don't know if you have any questions. I would like to thank all the speakers for their presence here tonight. We had a very interesting discussion. It was a very interactive debate. We hope there will be an agreement, and we will send a lot of wishes of success to all the negotiating team. If there is an agreement, we will we will work within the EU Parliament to see all the details, look at all the details, and scrutinize it and check the text in order to validate it. And we will ensure that the principles of the common fisheries policy in terms of sustainability and in terms of Article 17 that defends, that supports small-scale fishermen are still respected and complied with. And I will make sure that Article 17 will be complied with. So thank you all for this webinar. Thanks a lot, and don't hesitate if you have any additional questions, and I will try to answer your questions as best as I can. Thanks a lot to all of you.